Welcome to Bunny Trails, a whimsical adventure of idioms and other turns of phrase. I'm Shauna Harrison.
And I'm Dan Pugh. Each week, we take an idiom or other turn of phrase and try to tell the story from its entry into the English language to how it's used today. Have you ever had one of those days where work and life collide and you've put in an extra hard day at work, but you still have all those responsibilities once you get off work, like chores at the house or running errands or attending some function that you really wish you had said no to weeks ago, but you've already agreed and now you have to go? Well, once it's all done and you get home and you look at yourself in the mirror and you think, I have run myself into the ground. And according to the Oxford English Dictionary, to run something into the ground means, quote, to destroy or damage beyond repair by excessive use, to wear out, to exhaust or overcome through constant pressure, uncompromising or demanding treatment, etc., end quote.
Okay.
Yeah, so I really like this phrase, and as I was looking at the origin to try and identify, I think we don't really know, but there are three contenders that kept coming up and that I could find evidence that might back it up, right? So this is, we're just going to hit these three relatively quickly here. The first is a nautical expression, to run aground. So a ship that would move forward and unintentionally hit land, right? And that would be said to run aground. And now, like I said, I'm not saying it's a direct tie, but I could definitely see how damage to a ship by running aground could give the understanding that something is damaged and you've run it into the ground. So there's definitely some options there. Here's a literal example of that use from Eris's Birmingham Gazette out of England, and this is dated 12 April 1742, and it's talking about a ship that took damage from running aground. Quote, but that in coming out port passage, with them she run aground, which obliged her to stay behind them to repair her damage, end quote.
Okay.
So that's a place where they're using it literally. And then here's an example of running aground being used metaphorically, which lends more to the thought that this could be an early version of the phrase. This is from Pope's Bath Chronicle, named such because it was printed and published by Cornelius Pope, and it is out of England. It is dated 26 April 1764, and it's a poem signed MP, and it's addressed to Clorinda. Quote, love without hope is like breath without air, an impossible joy, a ridiculous care. Yet Cupid, like alchemy, runs us aground, in quest of projection which never was found. And though numberless ruins around you may view, yet so pleasing's the madness their steps you pursue. End quote. Which is a nice little ditty that they wrote there. But we see it, yet Cupid, like alchemy, runs us aground, right?
Yeah.
You're not actually in a ship. So we see it being used there as a an emotional exhaustion, right?
Mm-hmm. That's really, yeah, that's an interesting, I like that poem there.
So that's one potential origin is from that nautical expression. Another possible scenario is from its use in farming. Here's a good example of this from the Caledonian Mercury, which is out of Scotland. And this is 31 July 1775. And it's from an ad that was selling land. Quote, the premises are let for this crop under certain restrictions so as not to run out the ground, end quote. So in this case, run out the ground would mean to deplete the ground of nutrients and make it unsuitable for things to grow. So that is another possible origin of this phrase.
Okay, so you're running the ground out of
nutrients, right? You're damaging
resources.
It either beyond repair or it's going to take a long time, right? Yeah. Okay, so while it would make sense for either of these usages to be a sort of inspiration, I couldn't find any hard evidence to link the phrase to either of those. And I wonder if maybe as more works are digitized, we'll find a missing link of somewhere, or maybe all of these phrases are just, completely separate and this didn't run into the ground, didn't come from either of them. I don't know. I've seen other suggestions for it, uses in hunting, as in running out all of the animals. And so we're going to explore a few other hunting explanations. That's the third one that just don't quite sound correct, though, as we continue. But for now, we're going to have to stick with not being sure. The first time I could find this in print comes from the work In Spirit of the Times, a chronicle of the turf, agriculture, field sports, literature, and the stage. And this was dated July 9th, 1836. The phrase was found in a piece written by William Trotter Porter, and in it, a group was trying to make a bet on a race, and they were upping the amount and arguing about it, leading to this passage. Quote, Old Tompkins, who had not appeared during the making of the race, now came around, and seeing the bay, said, Popcorn, by God! He now came forward and addressed the other boys. Boys, it's no use to run the thing into the ground. If a man goes in for betting, I say let him go his load. But we have no ambition against you, so draw the bet to $100. That is enough for a little tacky race like this, just made for amusement. End quote. So we see him here saying it's no use to run the thing into the ground. Just, we're going to call it even. Just say you're betting $100 because they were arguing over how much they should bet. And, you know, they're
maybe trying to raise it a little higher than what is appropriate for the...
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So he's saying that you've run this idea into the ground, which is a really interesting take. But unfortunately, this first usage that I could find doesn't give any indication of whether, because it's it's completely metaphorical. So
Right.
So this next one has the phrase in the 1859 Dictionary of Americanisms, and it's by John Russell Bartlett. So this one is focused on hunting as an origin, right? And so we're going to look at two examples here in dictionaries that talk about this, but I'm not convinced by this. So here we go. Quote, to carry to excess, to overdo a thing, and thereby mar it. Probably a hunter's phrase to express the earthing of a fox or other game. End quote. So does this check mark a box for hunting origin? Not exactly, as we're going to see in this entry, which is the 1872 work Americanisms by M. Shell de Vere. This is in the section marked Canton slang, and it was the supposed origin and definition followed by its usage in an 1861 newspaper. Quote, to run into the ground means, in Western parlance, literally to force beavers and all burrowing animals to seek refuge in their holes underground. But the phrase has long since been adopted in all parts of the Union as a metaphor expressive of constant and close persecution, ending in destruction. The temperance question is likely to be run into the ground, sooner or later, but only to be replaced by some other question of the same kind, which will be taken up in its turn to answer the purposes of politicians. Springfield Republican, July 1861. End quote. So this feels like it could be a check mark in the hunting category too. But remember when I said the supposed origin here? So in S.R. Crocker's magazine, The Literary World, October 1872 edition, there was a question from a reader asking what the origin of run into the ground was. And the reader would call themselves Lead Pencil. And this is what S.R. Crocker had to say about it in The Literary World. Quote, Professor de Vere, in his Americanisms, gives this not very satisfactory account of it, end quote. And then he just says what de Vere had said, which I've already read. So even at the same time, these are in the same year even, Crocker is like, this is not a very good account. This doesn't make sense.
Right.
So that would seem to indicate that de Vere's origin story is maybe not correct, or at least Crocker didn't think it was correct, though maybe it is. I don't know. But I'm struggling to connect an animal going to ground and thus escaping the hunter to de Vere's definition of persecution leading to destruction. Because I'm not sure that definition will hold based on our earlier uses of it in 1832 and 1861. So I will say this, that S.R. Crocker ended his recital of de Vere's entry with this addendum, quote, the common meaning of the phrase seems to be to overdo a thing, to pursue one's game until it vanishes, end quote.
Okay.
So that is an interesting look at it. That adds a different element to the phrase that I don't really see today. In one interpretation, Crocker's take could mean overhunting, but that doesn't really jive with hunting as the origin, though it does match the definition we have now and its other uses.
Right.
For the origin to be hunting, based on both Bartlett and Crocker's definitions, it would have to be the hunter overdoing it, not the animal. The hunter has gone through all the work and somehow overdone it and has no animal to show for it, as the animal has gone to ground. but the animal is safe in their little hidey hole. So while it's an interesting take, I just don't. I don't think it matches with what Bartlett or Crocker are saying, which it just doesn't seem to follow the logic train from going from running an animal to the ground, which means you didn't get your game, right? And the
Right.
animal went to ground, to saying if you do something to run it into the ground, that it's damaged or destroyed. So there's a little element there, but like I said, we're just not 100% sure where this comes from. So I think any of those three are viable options. The
Right.
nautical expression of running aground for a ship, the going to ground for farming and meaning to have destroyed the land, and then from an animal going to ground during hunting.
I,
So
I think it's interesting too because I could see people taking their own, kind of source for that meaning too when
sure.
they are using the phrase. So
Hmm.
it's, I mean, even if the origin was one or the other, it could be that people just kind of associated it with one of the other meanings or one of
Right.
the other possible origins.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. It could just be, I mean, we've definitely seen, like, gilding the lily is a good example of a thing where we've just, it came from a misunderstanding. It came from someone just like smushing things together, because that you think it comes from Shakespeare, as we talked about in the episode, but
Right.
that's not what Shakespeare said.
Yeah.
So, and if you're interested to hear more about that, you can go check out our episode on gilding the lily. All right, so this next one, since we don't know what the origin is, we saw it in that earlier work in 1836, and here's an example from 1916. This is from the Daybook out of Illinois, USA, and it's dated January 10th, 1916. This is from a piece called Worth the Winning. The copyright was held at the time by W.G. Chapman, though this piece is credited to Walter Joseph Delaney. In it, there's a comfortable homestead owned by Gideon Lane that has fallen into disrepair. Quote, he had leased the North Farm, as it was so called, to a shiftless fellow with a large family who had let it run into the ground so far as crops and upkeep were concerned. He had let the house burn down from sheer carelessness and had left his donor with an 80-acre patch good for pasturage only. End quote. So maybe that's another tick bark for the farm origin story.
Mm-hmm.
but the author did need to clarify what he meant. So I don't know. He did have to clarify as far as the
Right.
crops and upkeep were concerned. Now, it's difficult to know if the phrase is applying to the situation in general in this, and the author didn't want to use the same phrase twice, or if the phrase in the author's mind only applied to the farm part of it. But in any case, the usage of the phrase is clear in its meaning of being damaged or worn out. The next piece comes from a USA Department of State bulletin. It's a summary of the principal problems at the Bogota Conference. It is dated February of 1948 and was in preparation for the conference that would start March 30th. Quote, the basic motivation for the trend towards centralization has been the desire to create a more effective and efficient system. As always, in an endeavor of this kind, a good idea can be run into the ground. End quote. So the Bogota Conference, it was actually the 9th International Conference of American States in 1948, and known as the Bogota Conference because that's where it was held, Bogota, Colombia. And so this is a fascinating subject, especially since most of the United States' internal conversation about leading up to this has been declassified. So we can see exactly what the United States was hoping to get out of this conference in those confidential conversations going into the conference. And so the outcome of the Bogota Conference was actually one of the first international human rights instruments that were general in nature, not about, one specific group of people, but like basic human rights, right? So this is really interesting that it's very sad that it took us till 1948 to have an international human rights instrument, but so this was really interesting. And we're going to look more into it in our behind the scenes episode, which airs every Friday on our Patreon, patreon.com/bunnytrailspod. Here is a piece from a letter of the week in the TV section of the Evening Star out of Washington, D.C., USA. It is dated December 10th, 1961, and in it, Mrs. C.C. of Silver Springs complains about the overuse of commercials during the show she used to love to watch. Quote, I just want to say that I'm among the club that will never buy a product that TV commercials run into the ground. My husband and I always like to watch Divorce Court. They used to let the lawyers argue or the judge sign a paper while they ran 2 or 3 silly commercials. Last night we counted 18 commercials during the program, and they broke in right in the middle of a question or answer. End quote. Yeah, I'm with you on that, Mrs. CC.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a totally fair assessment, and that's why the only ad you'll hear in our show is the one where we thank our patrons for their support.
This episode is sponsored by our amazing patrons on Patreon. And the cool thing about Patreon is it is 100% free to join the community. We have new things every weekday on the feeds. On Mondays, we have a conversation about what movies, shows, books, podcasts, and whatever else everyone is enjoying. Tuesdays see early access to the week's podcast. Wednesdays have all the links, books, songs, and other content mentioned in the week's episode. Thursday has patrons-only polls, and Fridays are our lightly edited behind-the-scenes video featuring all the cut content, goofs, and bonus facts you could imagine.
We've got some other pretty cool stuff too, like original digital artwork once a month made by Shauna, and direct access to talk with us. No algorithms getting in the way of what we see or don't see. Plus, you can get awesome name recognition like Pat Rowe does every episode. And our top spot is currently occupied by the amazing Mary Halsig Lopez. You can join the Bunny Trails community for free at Bunny Trails Pod on Patreon.
That's patreon.com/bunnytrailspod.
All right, that was 17 less ads than you'd find on Divorce Court in 1961. Let's kick off the modern uses with Ran It Into the Ground, a 1972 song by Bloodstone. Here are the opening lyrics. You know, sometimes the one you love can hurt you very, very much, and the whole world becomes a drag. But what gets me down most of all is when they do it time and time again. They seem to run their little game in the ground. End quote. The chorus of the song features another turn of phrase with 4 repetitions of "that was the straw that broke the camel's back." We talked about that episode 209, The Last Straw. So if you want to look more on that, you can jump back to that one.
Well, I feel like that the lyrics there are obviously very relatable, but I couldn't. Yeah, I can imagine that that's a. But this is a rock heavy metal?
Yeah,
maybe?
it's
Okay.
rock or funk. I don't remember now.
Gotcha.
I listened to it a long time ago.
Okay, fair. Bloodstone fits.
How to Run a Company Into the Ground is a 2007 book by Radomir Jintik. Here's the synopsis from the publisher. Quote, have you ever wondered why there are so many overpaid but completely incompetent people in high management positions? Did you ever shake your head in disbelief because of your manager's destructive decisions? Have you ever looked in awe as market leaders waste their immaculate reputation in just a few years? Search no more. The secret is out. Their manual is revealed to the public and available to all to learn from. How to Run a Company Into the Ground was a secret kept for decades from common people. Now you, your kids, or even your dog can profit from it by starting a wrecker career of your own. Take a dive into some of the most precious advice available to man on how to ruin your company's future. Learn how to bury even biggest companies with 100% foolproof advice, and all of that without ever landing behind bars or getting any of the blame. End quote.
Amazing.
That's great. Very good. Run Into the Ground is a poem that was published to DeviantArt on October 19th, 2008 by user R3D-R. Here it is, quote, in the States, we're so hypercharged, always going and going and going and going. Liquid glass running heavily down, glowing and growing and showing, always going. But if you stop for a moment, let the dust and the bones and the rubble, boiled blood all settle, and you realize the lubricant's gone. Steady stream, living life, stopped from going and going and going and going. And you feel so old once you take but a second to relax and see the whole world's rushing by, that you start up again, going faster and faster and faster and faster, because you can't stop going, or you see how frivolous it all really is. End quote.
These are too much. I need to stop. I'm feeling run into the ground.
Yeah, I thought it was a really good poem, and obviously the title is "Run Into the Ground," and the while the phrase doesn't show up in the poem itself, the whole poem is about that,
Yeah.
about, doing things. States, in this case, in the States, we're so hypercharged. States wasn't capitalized. So I don't know if that is shorthand for like United States or if that's like a state of being, or a state of existence. I'm not
Right.
not 100% sure. I think it works either way, though.
Yeah. Wow.
Run Myself Into the Ground is a song by Jessica Leah Mayfield off her 2011 album, Tell Me. Here's the chorus. Quote, "But I ain't gonna change for nobody at all. I'm starting to like this new love I have found. I don't want to let this dark companion go. I would rather run myself into the ground." End quote. So I did listen to this song and I wasn't sure how to describe it. So I was like, I need to go find someone who professionally reviews music to figure out what this style is called.
Okay.
And I think Stephen M. Dusner did a great job with the vibe of this song with his review for the album, which he did for pitchfork.com. Quote, "Ohio neo-country singer Jessica Leah Mayfield writes eloquently analytical love songs, with her languid drawl suggesting an interior monologue rather than an actual conversation, as if she's thinking things out in her head. She comes across as a woman torn between her heart and her brain." End quote.
Wow.
And that, I think, very well captures what I was unable to capture in, like, I was just like, I don't know what to call this. Because, like, it's almost like a jazzy, old school country, but like the song is jazzy, but she's got such a country vibe to it. But I
Right.
was like, wow, this is dark and brooding, but I love it.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I don't know. How to Run Your Company Into the Ground is a 2018 book by David Gargaro. Here's the synopsis of this one from the publisher. Quote, "Every small business owner makes mistakes in running their business. We learn from our mistakes and hopefully get better in running our business. But some people never learn and continue to fail. How to Run Your Company Into the Ground is the mostly true story of my time with a small publishing company that is somehow still in business today. The hapless owner of this enterprise had many chances to grow and succeed, but he found numerous ways to snatch defeat from the jaws of the victory. This book goes through many of those mistakes and explains what you should do to succeed." End quote. So both of these books
I
that
love
have
it.
this thing are definitely looking at how things have gone wrong in the past, and
Right.
how you could do it better.
I love this. I love that, like, kind of witty, slightly dark sarcasm to
Right?
it. How to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory.
Right? Yeah,
That's
exactly.
great.
Run Into the Ground is a weekly podcast with Dan Bassini and Andrew Valentine that started in 2022. Here is their About section from Spotify. Quote, "Punk adjacent music podcast, fearlessly hosted by Dan and Andrew. Talking to your favorite people about their favorite records. New episodes every Tuesday, bonus episodes every other Friday on Patreon. Listen everywhere, tell everyone." End quote. The most recent episode, as of this recording, was released in January of 2025, so I don't know if they're on a scheduled break or if the show has wrapped. Not sure. Well, despite not knowing the origin of this phrase, I still use it all the time. Fortunately, all three of the top contenders are relatively unproblematic. I like the nautical explanation best, though there's a tendency to ascribe expressions to nautical origins even when there's no evidence to support it. So I suppose we'll just have to be okay with not knowing for now. That's about all we have for today. If you have any thoughts on the show or pop culture references we should have included, reach out to us on our Patreon, patreon.com/bunnytrailspod, or comment on our website, bunnytrailspod.com.
It's poll time. Recently, we asked our patrons, which would you rather give up for a year, TV or music? With TV, we specified no over-the-air, no streaming services, no cable, etc. And with music, we specified no radio, no streaming, no records, tapes, CDs, etc. This was a 70-30 split, with giving up TV being the most popular choice. Heather said, quote, "TV would be difficult, but I think music would be almost impossible for me. I listen to something or other pretty much all day, at work, in the car, cleaning, cooking, etc. The lack of TV I could fill up with more books, but even though I can't make music, I kind of depend on it for my sanity, end quote.
That's fair.
Mary added, quote, so I think I would suffer a little, but since I prefer making music to listening, this would be the easier of the two for me. The worst part of this choice is that I use videos for both educating my students and for inspiration. But fast rewind to the 70s, I didn't have those resources when I was in the studio back then, so maybe I would regain some skills that have atrophied in the wake of technology, end quote.
That is an interesting take, yeah. Emily said, quote, music is my career. I couldn't go an hour, let alone a day or a year, end quote. Fair enough. That's totally fair.
Mm-hmm.
And JGP added, quote, oddly, I find I don't listen to music much, so giving it up probably wouldn't be as hard as giving up watching things, end quote. For me personally, this one would not be that hard most of the time. That it would be easy. I would just give up watching things. I already don't watch TV shows very often, and I maybe see one movie a year in the theater and don't watch any movies at home. That's, of course, not counting Airplanes, which I kind of like will sometimes put one on that I've already seen before. or if I'm going to be stuck for 4 hours on an airplane, then maybe I'll watch a movie for 2 of those hours or something. But the part that would be really tough for me is that I do like watching certain sporting events. I listen to the radio broadcast for baseball normally, but during the playoffs in the World Series, I also like to have the TV on so I can see what's happening. And every 4 years, I love watching the World Cup matches. So if that aligned with the time frame that I'd have to stop for a year, that would be really tough for me, I think. I just don't think I could give up music, though. That would be the thing. Music is life. I just don't think I could. I don't think I could do that. I feel much like Heather does with it. I depend on it for my sanity.
Yeah. Uh, the music is life kind of reminds me of this character in Ted Lasso. He's like, soccer is life. And that's how her football is life.
I was going to say, does he call it soccer?
Football is life, but yeah. Anyway, yeah, so that's what it made me think of. Music is life.
Nice.
Yeah, for me, TV in a heartbeat, like short form videos, take all of it, but leave my music alone.
Fair enough. Well, it's a good representation of the 70-30 split, I think, on the show. Yeah. Yeah. With the music winning the day. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, as a reminder, our silly polls mean absolutely nothing and are not scientifically valid. And patrons of all levels, including our free tiers, can take part. Head over to patreon.com/bunnytrailspod to take this week's poll. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you again next week. Until then, remember,
words belong to their users.